What's the go there?
I don't know what it is. This has been like
Did
this.
it blister or something?
No,
Ice one before,
iced.
like you get like
Oh yeah.
it hurt a little bit.
It's pretty fresh. Those flowers are from my mum.
We were doing the original one with it's sweet. But then the Viva, and then you come back under the Viva. I'm just going. Just like a rum.
It's tricky, like you can't.
You know this stuff?
Man, the myth, the legend. The legend.
Yeah.
The very legend party. Oh, hey.
Yeah, this guy. He's coming down.
The inventor of the art. And I used to. He's the one that
Not too bad, could be worse.
go open the door like you know better.
Okay, so let's try and make this short and sweet. Any trained professionals will simply look at the numerical value, such as macronutrient ratios, the macronutrient intake in total, and energy intake in total in regards to determining one's nutritional intake. Now, by no means is this arbitrarily just a bad approach, but today I'm just going to go through two issues that may arise when only accounting for the nutritional component and one's nutritional intake. So, just to be clear, I'm referring to the classical way of counting macronutrients. Macronutrients can be referred to as the chemical components of food that humans consume in the largest quantity. Macronutrients can be divided into three main groups, technically four, but the fourth being alcohol and usually isn't considered as part of one's regular diet, which leaves us with three main ones, that being protein, carbohydrates, and fat. So each macronutrient contains energy, or calories if you're from the US, and kilojoules if you're from Australia, but also contain within them certain compounds that only get released upon being broken down. These include proteins being broken down into amino acids, carbohydrates being broken down into saccharides or sugar molecules, and fats being broken down into fatty acids. So although foods will consist of varying macronutrient ratios and therefore the amount of energy they may yield, every food contains at least one type of macronutrient. Now, although macronutrients are an important factor, I don't know if you can actually hear that, but I usually would keep talking. Now, although counting macronutrients is an important factor to consider, it's by no means the only thing that we would want to consider when developing one's nutritional regime. This can be for many reasons, and today we'll just go through two examples of why. Number one, although numbers they provide very little insight into the quality of food intake. For instance, an individual in which that is adamant that they must count every bit of energy that they consume and every bit of grain in which that touches the scale are used to what we call energy alchemy. Individuals can, not all the time, start to view foods as being equivalent, such as processed deli meat being similar to wildly caught salmon, just because of the protein content each food may yield. Similarly, certain foods may vary in their chemical makeup. For instance, it's becoming increasingly recognized that a westernized diet is a lot higher in omega-6 compared to our historical intake, which has been linked to the pathogenesis of various diseases, simply reiterating that the sources in which an individual gets their fats from can have an important role to play in health outcomes. And this is irrespective of the energy or kilojoule content that food has. Number 2, numbers may fail to account for the way in which that nutrients are being partitioned and pay very little respect to the internal environment of the individual, such as the status and functioning of the gastrointestinal system and perhaps the synergistic effects certain nutrients may have on one another, as well as failing to account how physical activity may influence how these nutrients are being partitioned also. It may or may not be clear, but individuals in which that are much more active and thereby have an increased training volume and frequency tend to have improved nutrient partitioning, essentially being more effective at utilizing those nutrients towards things like muscle growth, energy provision, and also may have better insulin sensitivity and an increased protein turnover. But yeah, this is not denouncing that counting macronutrients isn't important or useful, but counting macronutrients isn't necessarily associated with being healthier, being fitter, or even being a better eater just because you're adhering to a set of numbers. There's much more that could be talked about this topic, but I think that's a good start. So what should you do next? I guess you may want to consider what food journals you have used in the past and consider which things have worked and which things have not, as well as the things in which that may have led to the most long-lasting changes and which ones only led to a brief change in a moment of time. Lastly, I touched on the potential psychological implications counting macronutrients or going down this route in respect to your nutritional intake can have on a previous video, but I may do another video sharing my personal experience and further insight into the information around this topic. I hope you enjoyed this content and got something valuable out of it. Let me know what else you may like to see. I think I'm gonna go do handstand now. Thank you. Sayonara.